everyone! In one of the comments of my latest videos, I got a message from Catherine and she said, can you make a video showing how you read your research papers and made notes of them to use in your thesis? Yes, I can. It was actually a lot harder to make this video than I anticipated, but I did do my best. I tried to cater for undergrads in terms of note-taking for essays and report writing, and then note-taking for honors students in terms of writing the introduction to your thesis. I've also really simplified the process, so my main hope is that this gives you a broad idea of what you can do. Down below is also a link to my thesis. Go and check it out. I hope that it helps. Okay, so in this video, first up, I will share my note-taking system, and then I'll explain how I structured an argument. And finally, I'm going to talk about the difference between reading research papers at an undergrad level compared to an honors level, because there is a slight difference and it's good to be aware of this. Last little bit, I have also finally got my act together. I am a lot more active now on Instagram. I would love to see you in that space too. It's just easier for me to be interactive with you guys there, so please come and check it out. I'm going to leave the link somewhere on this page and also down below. With any project, big or small, the initial research process is usually quite overwhelming. It's really cool and also mildly terrifying to see how AI can actually help us with this whole process. But I think an important question that we have to keep in mind when we're writing up a report or say our thesis is, what question are we trying to answer? How good are we at finding the most relevant information? So when you're doing the research for your project, there are 3 types of journal articles that you want to keep an eye out for. The first is original studies. So this is like a study with a literature review, a methods, a results, and a discussion section. And these studies are often great to use as evidence to support one of your arguments or to help you understand the key arguments going into the story that you're contributing to. They also show that you've done deep analysis into the topic that you're exploring. The second type is meta-analysis studies. They demonstrate the effectiveness of a group of studies. And I find that they're usually the best starting point for when I'm doing my research because they give me a nice bird's eye view of the arguments going on. The final type, type number 3, are called the editorial or explorative journal articles. And typically they're written by an expert researcher in the field who's putting forth a theory or a model or a novel idea for researchers to go and explore and find evidence for. And these types of articles are usually great for your discussion or for your hypotheses. So during my undergrad and my honors, I would typically start by trying to find the most recent research and also try and find meta-analyses studies, because this gave me like a bird's eye view of the situation, the key arguments going on, and what I could use to form my own argument. Okay, so I've opened up the black box that is my thesis from my honors year. You can see that it's called Literature Review, and in it I've put in folders of all the articles that I used for my thesis, but I'm going to go into this one, which is called Core Literature. And this was my starting block. These were the articles that I read in the early phases to get an idea of the key arguments that I needed to know for my thesis topic. As you can see, all of them are very recent for the time that I was doing my thesis back in 2018. I was directed to some of them by my supervisor. And you also notice that there's a little bit of highlighting. I was guilty of being a highlighter. Just open one up. This wasn't the only way that I took notes, but when I was reading an article for the first time, this feels so old school, but I liked to highlight important information that I thought was good. And I also like to highlight names of researchers and studies that I wanted to look up later that I thought would be important. I also went and did that in the reference section now and again. It feels really weird to be looking at this. So that's how it would all start, looking at the most important papers, a lot of reading, a little bit of highlighting, and now I'm actually going to show you how I took my notes using an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so this is the Excel spreadsheet that I used during my honors year, and it feels really weird to be looking at this. But as you can see, I've got information about the research paper to start off with. Then I go into the sample, the measures used, the results, limitations, theoretical implications, takeaways, and other notes. However, this is a lot of detail for an undergrad project. I think this is more appropriate for an honors project. If I was doing my undergrad, I'd probably just stick in the authors of the paper, I might do the measures. I focus more on the results, the limitations, and the theoretical implications. These would be the three main ones that would be important for undergrad, but for honours it's important to get a lot more detail, and I'll talk about that why towards the end of this video. But yeah, this was my note-taking system in a nutshell. I would just be putting the key points from these different sections in here, and it would help me keep track of all the studies I was looking at, because you do so much reading during your honours year. So after reading about 8 to 10 research papers depending on the project, you'll then have a bird's eye view of the key arguments going on, and you'll start to get a better sense of how to structure an argument. And a hot tip, I have noticed throughout my studies that the more time I spend reading the literature, the deeper I understand the different arguments, and I think it does make a little bit of a difference in getting your marks up to show that you've got that critical analysis. Okay, so now let's get into developing the structure. This will sound really basic, but everything that I've ever written as a student all boils down to this simple process. Here is an opening statement or an argument, here's the evidence that supports it, and here's the evidence that shows its flaws. And then for a research report or for a thesis, this is when you then come in and say, aha, here's my hypotheses, this is why I need to explore this and find out more information. Or if you were in undergrad and you were writing an essay, you'd then weigh up the strengths and the weaknesses and show your critical thinking by coming to a resolution. Okay, so if we have a quick look at my thesis, I was looking at computer-generated faces and seeing if we discriminated it differently to real faces. I'm gonna show you why in a sec. If I scroll down, it'll take me a little while. So this is the introduction. You can see my opening statement or my argument. Computer-generated faces are rapidly increasing, not only in entertainment, but they're also increasing in science. In our studies, we're using CG faces instead of real faces to test things. Then I go into the pros of doing this. It's understandable why. It's appealing. We can easily manipulate facial features. It allows us to have high experimental control. Then we scroll down and we see, aha, there is one problem with this. To date, no evidence has empirically justified that we can be using CG faces instead of real faces. We don't actually know if we're using the same neural pathways to process these different forms of stimuli. So that was my thesis argument, basically in a nutshell. And you can see that it follows that basic process. The opening statement, the pros of this argument, and then the flaws of the argument, and then I go into what my study is going to talk about and my hypotheses. So just a quick note, this is what we call a mini introduction for a thesis. An undergrad introduction would be probably a little bit longer than this, but for a thesis it would be a lot longer than this. After you outline your hypotheses, you'd then go into the arguments that support each point in your hypothesis, so basically why you're doing what you're doing. And you can see down below I've got the headings that I introduce here, so I look at, you know, why people are worse at recognizing CG faces than real ones, theoretical explanations for why they're worse at it. I introduce a model. This was from an explorative study. And I talked about how my study was going to focus on the perceptual route, but there was also a social categorization route that might explain why we're worse at recognizing computer-generated faces. I'm really getting into this, but yeah, basically you can see how I formulated the structure of my thesis introduction. Go and check it out for yourself. Okay, so we need to keep in mind that what I have just showed you was the end product of my thesis. So it was very polished, it was very nice. While we're note-taking, it doesn't look like this. So after doing a fair amount of reading and taking notes in that Excel spreadsheet, I'd then get open a Word document. I'd put my research question or my hypotheses at the top, and then I'd start to work out how I'd formulate an argument. So usually I'd put titles in of key papers that I thought were important and their different trains of debates. I'd try and reword it in my own language. I think what would be better is if I actually just show you, so I'm going to pull that up now. So if we have a quick look in my folder, this is my literature review notes that I used for my thesis project. This is my notes at a very rough place, very rough, very early days. I put my research questions at the top, so I'd always be coming back up to these. And I would use my Excel spreadsheet to gather notes and start to work out different arguments. I liked to categorize it by journal article, and I put down their key arguments to eventually start helping me flesh out my own argument that I used for my thesis, the different headings, and then the evidence for that particular heading. So, people are worse at recognizing CG faces than real ones, the evidence for, the evidence against. You can see Ballas and Pasilla 2017. Ballas and Pasilla. You can see how it all matches up. So I know this is very rough. I think this is why I found this video kind of tricky to make, but this was the really basic process that I used to help me take notes, basically switching between a Word doc and an Excel spreadsheet to formulate the introduction for my thesis. Okay, so as we start to finish off this video, I'm just going to quickly share the difference between reading journal articles during your undergrad compared to during your honors year. Basically, I learned that during my undergrad, I was a lot more focused on reading the introduction and the discussion of a journal article. However, when I then got into honors, I'd still read the introduction and the discussion, don't get me wrong, but I would spend more time looking at the methods and the results, because this is when I started to learn to critically analyze this and use this as part of my argument for why my study and my study design was the superior. And that's why I think during your honors year, it's just so important that you learn to take really good notes of the studies using something like an Excel spreadsheet to make sure you've got all the details. You can critically analyze what's missing, what's not, how yours is the best. And yeah, that's just my little hot tip for the end for the difference of undergrad and honors and note-taking. So look, I'm gonna wrap things up now. I've gone on at you long enough. I just hope that all made sense. And I know that things are probably gonna change with the development of AI and how we start using these tools. We're already using these tools like ChatGPT and that coming into play. But when it comes down to doing research and note-taking, I think the key things are to know what question you're answering and to find the information that is most relevant to answering that question. So I hope that this gave you some insight into my note-taking system back in the day when I was a student, 2018 for my honors year. And yeah, I will see you guys hopefully in another one of my videos, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!